everybody. Now we're going to do a story from this book today. It's called Fairy Gifts and it's in the Green Fairy book. Now today I'm going to do a shout out, but I'm not going to do it at the end. I'm going to do it in the middle. Now then, let's see who's listening to the middle today. It generally happens that people's surroundings reflect more or less accurately their minds and dispositions. So perhaps that is why the flower fairy lived in a lovely palace with the most beautiful and delightful garden you can imagine. It was full of flowers and trees and fountains and fish ponds and everything nice. For the fairy herself was so kind and charming that everybody loved her, and all the young princes and princesses who formed her court were as happy as the day was long, simply because they were near her. Isn't that nice? They came to her, and when they were quite tiny, they grew up and they never left her, and until they had to go away into a great big world. So they'd come to when they were little and they would stay with her until they got bigger, and then they had to leave. And when it came time for them to leave, they could have whatever gift they asked for. But today it is chiefly Princess Sylvia that you are going to hear about, okay? Now, the fairy loved her with all her heart, for she was at once original and gentle, and she had nearly reached the age at which the gifts were generally bestowed. However, the fairy had a great wish to know how the other princesses who had grown up and left her were prospering, and before the time came for Sylvia to go herself, she resolved to send her to some of them. So one day her chariot, drawn by butterflies, was made ready, and the fairy said, "Now, Sylvia, I'm going to send you to the court of Iris. She will receive you with pleasure for my sake, as well as for your own, and in 2 months you may come back to me again, and I shall expect you to tell me what you think of her." Sylvia was very unwilling to go away, but as the fairy wished it, she said nothing. Only when 2 months were over, she stepped joyfully into the butterfly chariot, and she could not get back quickly enough to the flower fairy, who, for her part, was equally delighted to see her again. "Now, child," she said, "tell me, what impression have you received?" "You sent me, madam," answered Sylvia, "to the court of Iris, on whom you had bestowed the gift of beauty. She never tells anyone, however, that it was your gift, though she often speaks of your kindness in general. It seems to me that her loveliness, which fairly dazzled me at first, had absolutely deprived her of the use of any of her other gifts or graces. In allowing herself to be seen, she appeared to think that she was doing all that she possibly could be required of her. But, unfortunately, while I was still with her, she became seriously ill. And though she is presently recovered, her beauty has entirely gone, so that she hates the very sight of herself and is in despair. She entreated me to tell you what had happened and to beg you, in pity, to give her her beauty back. And, indeed, she does need it terribly, for all the things in her that were tolerable and even agreeable when she was pretty seem quite different now she's ugly, and it's so long since she thought of using her mind or her natural cleverness that I really don't think that she has any left now, so she's quite aware of all this herself, so you may imagine how unhappy she is and how earnestly she begs for your aid." "Oh, you've told me what I wanted to know," cried the fairy, "but alas, I cannot help her. My gifts can only be given once." "Oh." So some time passed, and all the usual delights of the flower fairy's palace, and then she sent for Sylvia again, and she told her that she wanted to go and stay for a little while with Princess Daphne. And accordingly, the butterflies, they whisked her off again, and they set her down in a strange kingdom. But she had only been there a very little time before a wandering butterfly brought a message to her from the fairy, begging that she might be sent for as soon as possible, and before very long she was allowed to return. "Oh, madam," she cried, "what a place you sent me to this time." "Why, what's the matter?" asked the fairy. Daphne was one of the princesses who asked for the gift of eloquence, if I remember rightly. And very ill the gift of eloquence becomes a woman, replied Sylvia with an air of conviction. It is true that she speaks well, and her expressions are well chosen, but then she never leaves off talking. And though at first one may be amused, one ends by being wearied to death. Above all things, she loves any assembly for setting the affairs of a kingdom. So for on those occasions she can talk and talk without fear of being interrupted. But even then, the moment it is over, she's ready to begin again about anything or nothing, as the case may be. Oh, how glad I was to come away, I cannot tell you. Now I'm doing my shout out now, and the shout out is to somebody who I knew when I was very young, and I might still know now, and that person talks and talks and talks and talks, and he is called Stephen. So this story is for you, Stephen. Let's carry on. The fairy smiled at Sylvia, unfeigned disgust at her late experience, but after allowing her a little time to recover, she sent her to the court of the Princess Cynthia, where she left her there for 3 months. At the end of that time, Sylvia came back to her with all the joy and contentment that one feels at being once more at the side of a dear friend. The fairy, as usual, was anxious to hear what she thought of Cynthia, who had always been amiable and to whom she had given the gift of pleasing. Oh, at first I thought, said Sylvia, that she must be the happiest princess in the world. She had 1,000 people who vied with one another in their efforts to please and gratify her. Indeed, I nearly decided that I would ask for a similar gift. Well, have you altered your mind then? Said the fairy. Yes, indeed, madam, replied Sylvia, and I will tell you why. The longer I stayed, the more I saw that Cynthia was not really happy. Now, in her desire to please everyone else, she ceased to be sincere and degenerated into a mere coquette. And even her friends, who had felt the charms and fascinations with her, and all that approached her without distraction, were valueless, so that in the end they ceased to care for them and went away disdainfully. Oh dear. I am pleased with you, said Fairy. Enjoy yourself here for a while, and presently you shall go to Phillida. Sylvia was glad to have the leisure to think, for she could not make up her mind at all what she would ask for herself, and the time was drawing very near. However, before very long, the fairy sent us to Phillida and waited for her to report with an unabated interest. Now, I wonder what Phillida has been up to. I reached her court safely, said Sylvia, and she received me with much kindness and immediately began to exercise upon me brilliant wit that you had bestowed upon her. Oh, I confess I was fascinated by it, and for a week I thought that it was nothing more desirable. The time passed like magic. It was so great, the charm of her society. But I ended up by ceasing to covet that gift more than any of the others I've seen, for, like the gift of pleasing, it cannot really give satisfaction. By degrees I wearied of it, so delighted me at first, especially as I perceived it more and more plainly, that it's impossible to be constantly smart and amusing without being frequently ill-natured and too apt to turn all things, even the most serious, into mere occasions for a brilliant jest. So she just is witty, and even if it's serious, she turns it into a joke. Oh, the fairy in her heart agreed with Sylvia's conclusions and felt pleased with herself for having brought her up so well. But now it was the time for Sylvia to receive her gift, and all her companions were assembled. The fairy stood in the midst in the usual manner, asked what she would take with her into the great world. Sylvia paused for a moment and then she answered, I'd like a quiet spirit. And the fairy granted her request. This lovely gift makes life a constant happiness to its possessor and to all who are brought into contact with her. She has all the beauty of gentleness and contentment in her sweet face, and if at times it seems less lovely through some chance grief or disquietude, the hardest thing that one ever hears said is, Sylvia's face is pale today. It grieves one to see her so. And when, on the contrary, she is gay and joyful, the sunshine of her presence rejoices all who have the happiness to be near her. Oh, so which gift would you have if a fairy could give you a gift? I think I'd have the gift of quietness too. But you might want the gift of dancing or of swinging from trees or from flying aeroplanes. I don't know. You'll have to talk about it. Maybe let me know. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for listening and see you soon. Bye.